The dust settled slowly over Redemption Creek as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town. Sarah Brennan stood at the edge of the Mercantile's wooden porch, clutching a small parcel wrapped in brown paper against her chest. The fabric of her dress, faded from years of washing and patched at the elbows, felt suddenly heavier under the weight of their stares. 3 women stood just outside the dress shop across the rutted street, their silk parasols casting delicate shadows on the boardwalk. Even from this distance, Sarah could see their lips moving, could imagine the words they whispered behind gloved hands. She had known coming to town would be difficult. It always was. But her father needed medicine, and the supply wagon would not make another run for 2 weeks. The small ranch she and her father worked sat 15 miles outside town, a humble spread of 40 acres that barely produced enough to keep them fed. Her mother had died 3 years ago, taken by fever in the brutal winter of 1872. Since then, it had been just Sarah and her father, fighting against drought, debt, and the slow erosion of hope. Sarah descended the steps carefully, her worn boots clicking against the weathered wood. As she crossed the street, the 3 women fell silent, but their eyes followed her with the precision of hawks tracking prey. Martha Hendricks, the banker's wife, stood in the center, her emerald dress shimmering in the sunlight. To her left was Abigail Thornton, whose husband owned the largest cattle operation in the territory. And on the right stood Constance Waverly, newly arrived from San Francisco, whose wardrobe alone could have fed half the struggling ranchers in the county for a year. Sarah kept her eyes forward, willing herself invisible. But Martha's voice, loud enough to ensure she would hear, cut through the afternoon air like a knife. Some people simply have no sense of propriety, coming to town looking like a field hand. It is quite scandalous, really. Abigail's laugh was sharp and cruel. Perhaps she has nothing better. Though one would think pride might keep a person home if they cannot present themselves properly. Sarah's face burned, but she did not break stride. She had heard worse. The dress she wore had been her mother's, carefully altered and mended countless times. The original blue had faded to a soft gray blue, and the hem showed the careful stitches, where she had let it down as she grew. It was clean, pressed with the flat iron heated on the stove that morning, and it was all she had. The general store was her next stop. As she pushed through the door, the bell above jangled, announcing her arrival. Thomas Pruitt, the shopkeeper, looked up from his ledger and offered a curt nod. His eyes, like so many others in town, swept over her appearance before settling on her face with thinly veiled judgment. "Miss Brennan, what can I do for you today?" "I need to pick up the medicine, doctor. Holloway ordered for my father. And if you could add it to our account, I would be grateful. We will settle up after the cattle sale next month." Pruitt's expression hardened. "Your account is already considerably past due, Miss Brennan. I am afraid I cannot extend any additional credit." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Please, Mr. Pruitt, my father needs this medicine. He has been coughing something terrible, and the doctor says without it, the infection could spread to his lungs. I sympathize with your situation, truly I do. But I run a business, not a charity. Perhaps if you spent less time gallivanting around town and more time working, you would be able to pay your debts." The unfairness of it stole her breath. Gallivanting. She had not had a day of leisure in 3 years. Every morning began before dawn, tending to animals, mending fences, hauling water from the creek. Her hands were rough with calluses, her back ached from labor, and she fell into bed each night too exhausted even to dream. Before she could respond, the door opened behind her. She turned to find a man she had never seen before standing in the doorway, his frame blocking the afternoon light. He was tall, with broad shoulders and the weathered face of someone who had spent years under the open sky. His clothes were simple but well-made dark trousers, a cotton shirt, and a leather vest that had seen considerable use. A hat shadowed his eyes, but she could see they were a startling shade of gray, sharp and assessing. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice deep and courteous. He removed his hat as he stepped past her, revealing dark hair touched with gray at the temples. He could have been 40 or 50, It was difficult to tell with men who lived hard lives under the sun. Sarah moved aside, her cheeks still burning from Prute's words. She watched as the stranger approached the counter, pulling a worn leather wallet from his vest pocket. "I need to settle an account," he said to Prute. "The Brennan account. Whatever they owe, put it on my bill." Sarah's head snapped up. "Sir, I cannot let you do that. You do not even know me." The stranger turned to face her fully, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not pity but understanding. Recognition of a kind of struggle that went deeper than money. "Name is James Coulter, miss. I just purchased the Rocking Sea Ranch, about 20 miles north of here. And I know what it is like to be judged by appearances rather than character." Prute cleared his throat awkwardly. "That is very generous, Mr. Coulter, but the Brennan account stands at nearly $80. Then I suppose you had better add it up so I know what I am paying." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "Mr. Coulter, I cannot accept charity. My father and I, we pay our own way." Coulter studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I respect that, Miss Brennan. So let us call this a loan to be repaid when you are able. In the meantime, I find myself in need of help at the Rocking Sea. Previous owner let things fall into considerable disrepair. If you know anyone looking for work, I would appreciate the referral." Something in his tone told her this was not charity disguised as opportunity, but a genuine offer. Still, pride made her hesitate. "What kind of work?" "Everything from mending fences to breaking horses to managing the books. Previous owner was not particular about record keeping, and I need someone with a sharp mind to help sort it all out." Sarah thought of her father, of the medicine he needed, of the ranch that seemed to slip further from their grasp with each passing season. Pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. "I can keep books," she said quietly, "and I can mend fence and work cattle as well as any man." "I do not doubt it, Miss Brennan. Can you start Monday?" "Yes, sir. I can." Prute completed the transaction with obvious discomfort, counting out change for Coulter while wrapping Sarah's father's medicine in brown paper. As Sarah took the package, she met Coulter's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Coulter. I will not forget this kindness." "No thanks necessary. I look forward to working with you, Miss Brennan." Sarah left the store with the medicine clutched tightly in her hands, her mind spinning. As she untied her horse from the hitching post, she heard the familiar voices of Martha Hendricks and her companions approaching. They had been watching, she realized, waiting to see what transpired. "Well," Martha said loud enough for half the street to hear, "it appears Miss Brennan has found herself a patron. How convenient." The implication in her tone was clear and vicious. Sarah felt her face flame with humiliation, but before she could respond, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. "Ladies." James Coulter's voice cut through the afternoon air like a whip crack. He had followed her out of the store, and now stood on the porch, his expression thunderous. "I could not help but overhear your conversation. Seems to me you have a considerable amount to say about Miss Brennan." Martha's smile was brittle. "We were merely making an observation, Mr. Coulter. Surely you can understand our concern for the moral character of our community." "Moral character," Coulter repeated slowly, descending the steps until he stood at street level, his gaze moving from one woman to the next. "That is an interesting phrase coming from women who spend their afternoons gossiping and tearing down a young woman who works harder in a day than the three of you have in your entire lives." Abigail drew herself up indignantly. "How dare you speak to us in such a manner? Do you have any idea who we are?" "I know exactly who you are. I know that your husband, Mrs. Thornton, grazes his cattle on public land while claiming it is his own. I know that your husband, Mrs. Hendricks, forecloses on struggling families while extending unlimited credit to his wealthy friends. And I know that you, Mrs. Waverly, left San Francisco one step ahead of scandal involving your husband's business practices." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So let us discuss moral character, shall we?" The three women stood frozen, their faces cycling through shock, outrage, and fear. Martha found her voice first. "Those are slanderous accusations, Mr. Coulter. My husband will hear about this. I certainly hope he does. In fact, I would welcome the conversation. You see, I spent 20 years as a federal marshal before I retired to ranching. I have connections throughout this territory, and I know where to look when I want to find the truth about someone. He turned his gaze to Sarah, and his expression softened. Miss Brennan has nothing to hide. She is honest, hardworking, and caring for an ailing father while trying to keep a ranch running against impossible odds. That takes more courage and character than any of you have shown. He looked back at the three women, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. I have also noticed that you all seem quite concerned with Miss Brennan's dress. Let me tell you something about that dress. It is clean. It is carefully mended. And it is worn by a woman who understands that a person's worth has nothing to do with the clothes on their back and everything to do with what is inside their heart. That dress represents sacrifice, love, and dignity in the face of hardship. It is worth more than all the silk and satin in this entire town because of the woman wearing it. Sarah felt tears spilling down her cheeks now. Unable to stop them, no one had ever defended her like this. No one had ever looked past the faded fabric and worn boots to see the person beneath. It is not the dress that matters. Coulter continued, his voice ringing across the street, drawing the attention of everyone within earshot. It is the heart inside, and Miss Brennan has more heart than the three of you combined. Now, I suggest you ladies find something more productive to do with your time than tearing down decent people. Because if I hear another word spoken against Miss Brennan, I will make it my personal mission to ensure everyone in this territory knows exactly what kind of character you all possess. The silence that followed was absolute. Martha Abigail and Constance stood pale and trembling with rage or shame or both. Finally, Martha gathered her skirts and turned sharply, nearly stumbling in her haste to leave. The other two followed, their parasols bobbing like flags of retreat. Sarah stood frozen, unable to quite believe what had just happened. Around them, townspeople who had witnessed the confrontation stood on porches and in doorways, whispering among themselves. She saw Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher, smiling. Old Pete from the livery stable gave her a subtle nod of approval. Miss Brennan, Coulter said gently, drawing her attention back to him. Are you all right? She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. You did not have to do that, Mr. Coulter. You have made enemies today on my account. Those women were enemies to decency long before I arrived. I simply made it clear that their behavior will not go unchallenged. He studied her face, his expression kind. My wife wore the same dress for 10 years. She patched it and mended it, and wore it with pride, because she knew that what mattered was not the fabric, but the love she showed to everyone around her. She died 5 years ago, and I have spent every day since trying to live up to her example. When I saw you today, I saw her spirit. That is why I spoke up. Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. I am sorry for your loss. And I am sorry for yours. But loss teaches us what matters, does it not? It strips away the superficial and leaves only truth. He placed his hat back on his head and tipped it to her. I meant what I said about the job, Miss Brennan. The rocking sea needs someone with your strength and character. I hope you will come Monday. I will be there, Mr. Coulter. You have my word. He nodded, satisfied, and walked toward his own horse tied further down the street. Sarah mounted her mare with shaking hands, her father's medicine secure in her saddlebag. As she turned the horse toward home, she glanced back at the town one last time. For years, she had dreaded coming here, had felt the weight of judgment and scorn with every visit. But something had shifted today. Something fundamental. The ride home took 2 hours, giving her time to think. The land rolled out in every direction, brown grass and scrub brush broken by occasional stands of cottonwood trees along dry creek beds. The sky stretched enormous overhead, that particular shade of blue that existed nowhere else on earth. This was harsh country, unforgiving and brutal, but it was home. Her mother was buried on the hill overlooking their ranch, beneath a simple wooden cross that her father had carved with his own hands. When Sarah arrived home, she found her father sitting on the porch, his face drawn and gray. William Brennan had once been a robust man, tall and strong, but illness and worry had whittled him down to a shadow of his former self. He looked up as she dismounted, his eyes questioning. "Did you get the medicine?" "Yes, Papa." She brought the package to him, then sat on the step beside his chair. "And something else happened today. Something I need to tell you about." She recounted the entire story, from the women's cruel words to Coulter's intervention to the job offer. Her father listened in silence, his weathered hands folded in his lap. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This Coulter," he finally said. "He sounds like a good man. He is, Papa. He saw past everything, saw who I really am. And he was not afraid to stand up for what was right, even against the most powerful people in town." William reached over and took her hand, his grip weak but warm. "Your mother would have been proud of you today, Sarah. Proud of how you carried yourself, proud of your strength. And she would have been grateful to Mr. Coulter for his kindness." He paused, coughing roughly. "I have been worried, daughter. Worried about what will happen to you when I am gone. Papa, do not talk like that. This medicine will help. You will get stronger." He shook his head gently. "We both know that is unlikely. But today, I feel better knowing there are still good people in this world. People like Mr. Coulter who see worth beyond appearances. Promise me something, Sarah. Anything. Promise me you will never let anyone make you feel less than you are. Your mother wore that dress with pride, and you wear it with equal grace. It is not the dress that makes the woman. It is the woman who gives meaning to the dress." Sarah felt fresh tears coming and did not try to stop them. "I promise, Papa." That night, after her father had taken his medicine and gone to bed, Sarah sat at the small table in their cabin and looked at her mother's dress hanging on the peg by the door. In the lamplight, she could see every patch, every careful stitch that held the fabric together. Each one represented a choice her mother had made, a priority she had set. The dress was not worn because they were poor, though they certainly were. It was worn because her mother had chosen to invest in other things: food for the table, seed for planting, medicine when needed, and love freely given to her family and neighbors. The dress was not a symbol of poverty. It was a symbol of values. Monday morning arrived wrapped in the golden light of early autumn. Sarah woke before dawn, as always, and completed her morning chores. She made breakfast for her father, ensured he had everything he needed for the day, and saddled her horse. The ride to the rocking sea took her north, through terrain that grew gradually more rugged. Coulter had not exaggerated about the state of the ranch. Fences sagged or lay broken on the ground. Buildings needed paint and repair. The whole place had the air of neglect and abandonment. But she could also see its potential. Good water, decent grazing land, and solid bones beneath the neglect. With work and time, it could be something impressive. Coulter met her in the yard, already up and working despite the early hour. He showed her around, pointing out what needed attention most urgently. The books, as he had said, were a disaster. The previous owner had kept sporadic records at best, and sorting out exactly what assets the ranch possessed would take considerable work. "I will be honest with you, Miss Brennan," Coulter said as they stood in what passed for an office in the main house. "This job will not be easy. The work is hard. The hours are long, and I can only pay modest wages until we get the ranch profitable again. But I give you my word that you will be treated fairly and with respect, and I never ask anyone to do work I would not do myself. That is all I have ever wanted, Mr. Coulter. A fair chance." Over the following weeks, Sarah fell into a rhythm. She rose before dawn, completed essential tasks at her own ranch, then rode to the rocking sea. The work was indeed hard, but it was satisfying in a way that fed her soul. Coulter was true to his word, working alongside her whether they were mending fence, sorting cattle, or balancing ledgers. He was a patient teacher, sharing knowledge earned through decades of experience. But more than that, he treated her as an equal. When she offered an opinion, he listened. When she made a mistake, he corrected her without condescension. And when she succeeded, he acknowledged it with genuine praise. Other workers began arriving as word spread that the rocking sea was hiring. Coulter chose carefully, selecting men who showed character over those who merely showed up. Within a month, they had assembled a small crew of cowboys, each one grateful for the opportunity and willing to work hard. Sarah noticed something else changing too. In town, people began treating her differently. The encounter with Martha Hendricks and her companions had become legendary, repeated and embellished, until it had taken on mythical proportions. But beneath the exaggeration lay truth, and that truth had shifted perceptions. Sarah was no longer just the poor girl in the old dress. She was the woman who had dignity in the face of cruelty, who had earned the respect of James Coulter, and who worked as hard as any man in the territory. One afternoon in late October, Sarah was working in the office when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw her father's mare, and her heart seized with fear. Her father never left the ranch anymore, was barely strong enough to walk from the house to the barn. If he had come here, something was terribly wrong. She rushed outside to find not her father, but Marcus Webb, their neighbor, helping an unconscious William Brennan down from the saddle. Coulter appeared from the barn, and together they carried him into the house. What happened? Sarah demanded, her voice shaking. Found him collapsed in his barn, Miss Sarah. Rode as fast as I could, but the rocking sea was closer than town. Sarah knelt beside her father, feeling his forehead burning with fever. His breathing was labored and rattling. This was worse than before, much worse. Marcus, ride to town and get Dr. Holloway. Tell him it is urgent. Coulter's voice was calm but commanding. Marcus nodded and left immediately. For the next several hours, Sarah sat beside her father, bathing his face with cool water, holding his hand, and praying. Coulter stayed with her, bringing water and blankets, keeping the fire going, never once suggesting she should leave. Dr. Holloway arrived as the sun was setting, his face grave after examining William. He drew Sarah aside, his voice gentle but honest. The infection has spread to his lungs, Miss Brennan. I can make him comfortable, but beyond that, there is little I can do. I am sorry. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Coulter's hand on her shoulder was the only thing that kept her standing. How long? She whispered. Days, perhaps. Maybe a week if he is strong. Her father died 3 days later, on a crystalline autumn morning with the sun streaming through the window. Sarah was holding his hand, and his last words were, "Be proud, daughter. Always be proud." The funeral was held on the hill beside her mother. The entire community turned out, far more people than Sarah had expected. They came from ranches miles away, townspeople who had never spoken to her before, and every single one of Coulter's crew. Even Martha Hendricks appeared standing at the back, her face carefully neutral. After the service, as people offered their condolences, Coulter took Sarah aside. "What will you do now, Miss Brennan?" She looked out over the land her parents had loved, the small ranch they had poured their lives into. "I will keep going, Mr. Coulter. It is what they would want. I will work the ranch and continue working for you, if you will still have me. Always," he said firmly. "But Sarah, I need you to understand something. The Brennan Ranch is mortgaged to the bank. Your father, he borrowed against it to buy medicine and supplies. With him gone, the bank will foreclose. You will lose everything." She had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real and terrible. "How long do I have?" 30 days, according to the papers your father left. "But I have been thinking about this, and I have a proposal." He explained his idea carefully. The rocking sea was large enough to absorb the Brennan spread, combining the two ranches into a single operation. Coulter would pay off the mortgage, and Sarah would become a full partner in the rocking sea. Not an employee, but an equal partner with equal say in all decisions. "I know this is not what you envisioned," he said quietly. "But your father's legacy would continue. The land would still be worked, still be loved. And you would never have to worry about losing it again." Sarah looked at this man, who had changed her life in the space of a few months. He had defended her when she was defenseless, had given her opportunity when she had none, and now offered her a future when everything seemed lost. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Coulter? You barely know me." He smiled, And for the first time she saw genuine warmth break through his reserved exterior. "Because I recognize quality when I see it, Sarah. And because the world needs more people like you and your parents. People who understand that real wealth is not measured in money or possessions, but in character and heart." She thought of her mother's dress, still hanging in her cabin. Thought of all the lessons her parents had taught her about dignity, about pride, about the things that truly mattered. And she thought of the future she could build here, honoring their memory by living according to their values. "I accept your offer, Mr. Coulter, and I think it is time you called me Sarah. Only if you call me James." They shook hands on it, sealing the partnership that would define both their futures. Over the next year, the combined ranch prospered. Sarah proved to have a talent for business that complemented James's practical experience. Together they built something remarkable, a ranch known throughout the territory, not just for its productivity, but for its integrity. They treated their workers fairly, dealt honestly with everyone, and never forgot where they had come from. Sarah still wore her mother's dress to town, though she could now afford a dozen new ones. She wore it because it reminded her of who she was and what she valued. And she noticed something wonderful. No one mocked her anymore. Instead, people looked at her with respect. Young women asked her advice. Old ranchers sought her opinion on cattle prices and market conditions. The dress had not changed, but everything else had. One spring morning, as she and James reviewed the books in the ranch office, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sarah, there is something I have been meaning to discuss with you." She looked up from the ledger, curious. It was unlike James to be uncomfortable about anything. "Over this past year, I have come to rely on you not just as a business partner, but as a friend. Perhaps my closest friend. And I find myself thinking that this partnership might be even stronger if it were made permanent in another way as well." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. What way would that be, James? He met her eyes, and she saw a vulnerability there that she had never witnessed before. "I am not a young man, Sarah. And I know I have little to offer except hard work and honest dealing. But if you would consider becoming my wife, I would spend every day trying to be worthy of you." She thought about everything they had built together, the respect and understanding that had grown between them. She thought about her parents' marriage, built on partnership and mutual support. And she realized that what James offered was exactly what she wanted, not romance born of passion and foolishness, but love born of respect and shared values. "Yes, James, I will marry you." They married in the small church in Redemption Creek on a summer morning, surrounded by friends and workers in half the territory. Sarah wore her mother's dress, altered one final time, and she wore it with her head held high. As she walked down the aisle, she saw the faces of everyone she had come to know over the past year. She saw respect and admiration and genuine happiness for her. And in the front row, she saw Martha Hendricks, Abigail Thornton, and Constance Waverly, all dressed in their finest clothes. But this time, they were smiling. Not mockingly, but genuinely. Martha even nodded to her as she passed, a gesture of acknowledgement if not quite friendship. After the ceremony, as Sarah and James stood greeting their guests, Martha approached. She stood for a moment, clearly uncomfortable, before finally speaking. "Mrs. Coulter, I owe you an apology, a long overdue apology. I was cruel to you when you deserved only kindness. And I have watched over this past year as you showed this community what real character looks like. I am ashamed of my behavior, and I hope someday you might forgive me." Sarah studied the woman who had once made her feel so small. She saw genuine remorse in Martha's eyes, and she remembered what her mother had always told her: holding grudges only poisons your own heart. "We all make mistakes, Mrs. Hendricks. What matters is what we do after. I forgive you." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Sarah stood for a moment alone, looking out over the ranch that was now her home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She thought of her parents, wished they could see this moment, and then realized they probably could. James came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. Happy, Mrs. Coulter. Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Coulter. You know, he said thoughtfully, people in town are still talking about that day I defended you. Some say I was harsh. Were you? No, I was truthful. And sometimes truth is harsh. He looked down at her, his expression serious. But the real truth is this: it was never about the dress, Sarah. It was always about you. Your strength, your dignity, your heart. The dress was just fabric. You gave it meaning. Sarah leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had become her anchor. My mother used to say that a person's worth is not measured by what they wear, but by what they do. She taught me that every day of my life. She taught you well. And now you teach others just by being yourself. They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Behind them, music and laughter drifted from the celebration. Before them, the land stretched out in shadows and promise. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, from mockery and struggle to respect and partnership. She thought about the dress that had once been a source of shame and had become a symbol of strength. And she thought about the future, full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. It was not the dress that had changed. It was never about the dress. It was about the heart inside, about the courage to be true to yourself, even when the world told you that you were not enough. It was about finding people who saw past the surface to the truth beneath. It was about building a life on values rather than appearances, on substance rather than show. And it was about understanding that real wealth, real worth, came not from silk and satin, but from love and loyalty, from hard work and honest dealing, from dignity maintained in the face of cruelty, and from the strength to stand tall, even when the world tried to make you small. Sarah Coulter wore her mother's dress that day, and she wore it with pride. Not because it was beautiful, though to her it was. Not because it was new, for it certainly was not. But because it represented everything she believed in, everything she valued, everything she was. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the dress, but the heart inside.